What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the RAD Lab, a podcast that dives deeper into topics to help you become a better athlete, and a platform for athletes, coaches, and clinicians from the community to share their stories and experiences to give you an idea of how you can become the best version of yourself. My name is Liam. I'm a strength and conditioning coach at RAD. I'm delighted to have you guys along for the ride as we share this journey towards further understanding the world of human performance. Now, I'm currently here at Yale University, as you probably heard on the last podcast. I'm over here doing a little bit of research at the moment. And while I'm here, I thought I'd interview some interesting people. So today, I want to get this right, TJ. We have TJ Belanger in the house, the Director of Student Athlete Innovation and Sport Performance at Yale University. TJ, how you doing?
Great, Liam. Got that right.
Nailed it?
Yeah, I think you might be a little off with the interesting people, but we'll see.
We'll see how we go. So yeah, for those of you that probably don't know, TJ is basically the head of S&C here at Yale. So he looks after all of the coaches and the staff that filter down into the different sort of sports and the different teams here at Yale. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. But yeah, for starters, the man himself can probably explain it a little bit better. So TJ, if you can just give us a little bit of background into who you are and just your journey so far as a coach.
All right, perfect. So my background, where I actually started off, just my professional career in general, was actually as a registered nurse. I did that for 5 years full time. I still actually have my license and continue to work occasionally in the medical field. Going through it, I realized I wanted to do something a little different, and when a master's in exercise science as an option was presented to me, didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, but I was like, this at least sounds like there's options. And fortunately, down the road from here, Yale, there's a state school in Connecticut I got my master's at. So I did a 2-year program at Southern Connecticut State University for my master's. And during my time in the strength and conditioning class, it just was kind of like, oh, like this is actually a career. Like this isn't just a hobby. That's pretty cool. I wish I knew about that 6 years ago. So really took an interest into it, did very well with it to the point that when I graduated, I had applied to be a TA for my master's and wasn't able to get it, but they knew I had an interest in teaching, and they actually needed someone to take over for an adjunct position for strength and conditioning, because the teacher who had been doing that was picking up a research load. So immediately after I got my master's, I started teaching the strength and conditioning class at Southern for their undergrads. While they're doing that, the former director here at Yale, Tom Newman, had actually come onto the campus looking for interns, and the directors of the programs there knew as much as I wanted to teach, I wanted to pursue this career. So did an internship here. Long story short, I've been able to stick around and get kind of the next level up of position, all the way up now to I'm the director running the show. So a lot of luck in that whole process, but definitely a lot of hard work as well too.
Yeah, no doubt, absolutely. And so, yeah, people are probably curious in your current role right now. So you've gone through the ranks. As of right now, what does a typical day for you look like? Do you manage just the team, or are you managing like sports and that as well? What's a day in the life look like for Coach TJ?
All right, the main role I have as a coach is I'm the head strength and conditioning coach for our football team, our men's lacrosse team, and our women's field hockey team. And then as the director for the department, I have to oversee the rest of the staff in the strength and conditioning department, make sure that they're providing the right quality training to the teams that they oversee. I'm here as a resource for them if they need anything, and then I'm also that department liaison to athletic administration, sports medicine, all the other different areas as well. So I support my staff if they need to have conversations with coaches about training. I work with the medical staff to try to use that innovation part of my title and try to come up with new ways to continue to bring S&C forward, both in the world of performance as well as, return to play, injury risk reduction, all that kind of stuff. So the day-to-day for me, honestly, is usually in school. There's usually some kind of block of morning training, a block of administrative meetings, a little bit of downtime for myself, and then a block of afternoon training, going to practices and stuff like that. So that is a very oversimplified day-to-day view, but it sums up pretty much like how it goes here Monday through Friday.
For sure. So yeah, super hands-on though, right? So like it's not sort of something where, you can see it sometimes in some institutes where, the top dogs sort of like they sit in their ivory tower a little bit and oversee all the subjects. But even just from my experience being here and being amongst it, you're like one of those people that, you lead the team from the floor, like you're actually on the floor doing the thing, which probably helps your ability to communicate with the staff too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very fortunate in my time here to work with some great people about how they develop leadership and exactly how you said it. Like, that's one of those things. It's not a sit back, kick my feet up, bark orders, you guys do what I tell you. It's very much like, it is a team, and if the team fails, there's usually something that I did wrong, whether it was not communicated enough, something along those lines. So, I put in probably 20 to 30 hours of floor time throughout the week, and whether that's just my teams or helping assist cover other teams and stuff like that, it's a lot easier for me to have a pulse and a feel for what's going on when I'm actually out there and involved in what the other coaches have going on. So it definitely helps to be present in that way.
For sure. So let's dive in now that everyone knows a little bit more about you. Let's dive into the topic for today. So we're going to discuss strength and power development, in particular with collegiate level athletes. So obviously a lot of what we talk about today will apply to like the greater industry for starters, but then also, more individually for the people back home. But we're going to look at it from the lens of a coach, I suppose, in the college system. So for those that don't know, Yale is obviously very academically strong, but they're also a Division I college sports organization as well. So they have some very high level athletes that come through, which requires a lot of care and a lot of commitment from the coaches to make sure that they're playing their best as well. So for starters, I'm sure, like we said, as you manage the football team, lacrosse, field hockey, lots of moving parts, lots of different things to sort of go there. As a really, really basic kind of overlay, what are sort of some of the differences that you have to, I guess, implement from team to team? Or what are, I guess, some of the main running themes that you might see from sport to sport?
So I'm fortunate that I have three teams. They're either a fall sport or a spring sport. So I don't really have that difficulty of having to deal with a competitive season that spans over 2 academic semesters with the break in the middle. So I don't end up having like 6-8 month seasons like most people who have a winter sport would have. So just that in and of itself with the 3 teams that I train is it's a consistency that helps me a lot because it makes my off-season training pretty similar in how I handle it for both of them. But then obviously, the big difference there is football, field hockey are fall sports for us. They start competing right away. They get here in the middle of August to, get acclimated, get ready to roll, and usually by the start of September they're doing their first games. And lacrosse, on the other hand, they don't compete until February basically. So when they show up on campus in September, that's kind of the middle of their off season. So they've either already started if they're a returner, or for the first years, it's like the first time they're getting to work with me. So that's definitely a nuance that's, a little tough, but a benefit in the sense of I at least get the academic calendar to really train them up and be certain we're preparing them for season. Whereas, those fall sports, it's different because, again, like you mentioned, like it's an academic institution. What a lot of people don't realize is we don't have scholarship athletes. Our athletes choose to play sports because they want to, and there's nothing keeping them here. If they decide that they don't want to play anymore, they could stop playing and they're already here in Yale, and nothing's going to change. They're not going to have to worry about losing a scholarship or not being able to stay here. What it also means is for like those fall sports like field hockey and football, we can't require any of our athletes to be here. So we were fortunate that we have a coaching staff that understands the importance of that, and a team culture that has understood the importance of that. So basically every summer we get somewhere between 60 to 80 kids anyway, and we're able to try to get them prepared for the upcoming season that way, because that's the biggest challenge I see with those two fall sports. It's you could have 2 months where I have no idea what you're doing and hoping you're following the training plan at home, or we get you here and we can say to the coaches, hey, I know where this person's going to be at. This is what you can expect from them going into season. So those are probably some of the biggest similarities and differences between those training approaches for those teams.
For sure. It's it's a very unique situation where if you look at like any professional sports team, of course, when these guys are there, it's their job. They're actually supposed to be in the weight room. They're supposed to be doing these things. Even at some Division 1 colleges that we know of that might be in different divisions, even across the country. If you're there on a scholarship, you're expected to, be an athlete almost before you're expected to be, a student, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Quite the opposite here, obviously. So obviously, there's quite a challenge there to, not only keep the kids, I guess, engaged in what they're doing, but, keep monitoring to make sure that they're actually sort of progressing. So what are some of the things that you have employed, throughout your time that you've found to be, I guess, the most successful to just make sure that, the guys that maybe don't always want to be, in the gym, putting in the work, especially in preseason, I guess stressing the importance of them being there, but also, making sure that they show up.
The thing that's probably stuck with me the most was something I heard in probably my first month here as an unpaid intern. And it was just that the kids aren't going to care how much I know until they know how much I care. And, for anyone that's listening, whether you're a coach or an athlete, it is something that is absolutely true. And I really do stress the importance of, when it comes to strength and conditioning, like that is an investment. This element of your game as an athlete it's a piece of equipment that needs to be tailor-made for you, and it needs to be the right, training program for you. And you need to have a coach that understands that and invests in it that way. And that's your most likely recipe for success. I'll actually use our field hockey program here as an example. There was an approach that I had for them. It took my first full year to figure out the right approach for them, and that approach worked well for 3 to 4 years. Post-COVID, I was trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it just wasn't working anymore. And again, it took about 6 to 8 months to really realize it. And going into this last off season, I was talking to the coaches, what do you see that gets them motivated? How do you see them getting competitive? And found what they were seeing and who they were saying was the people that would really drive that element. It was the exact opposite of what I was seeing in the weight room. But if that's driving it out on the pitch, if I can get them to drive it in the weight room, then that'll drive everybody else as well. So I found the elements of training that needed to be focused on for that group. And it had nothing to do with what was actually in the training plan. It was very much so how we approached the training plan that had to change. And it made a world of difference. We had our best offseason I've ever had. And I will tell you that I've run programs that I know should have gotten better results, but the commitment of this group to what we did this offseason was massive, that it made up for the fact that it may not be the most technically sound written plan ever. Then on the flip side, you get something like football, where I just know I have the utmost support of the coaching staff. It's a daily, it's weekly, if not daily, my conversations with them. So I get a lot of freedom in being able to implement what I need to there, and I get the support of them that the kids basically know, if I say it, it might as well be the head football coach that's saying it. And so it really eliminates any back and forth there. And then you get into another situation like lacrosse. I was definitely here and part of a group that already had a really, really good culture when I was an assistant for that team when I first started here. And so what I inherited was pretty much already a well put into place culture, where it's just this is what we do and this is how we train and this is what's important. And again, post-COVID, there was a little bit of rebuild back into it, but I can't take much credit for what is going on with that team. That's something that groundwork's been laid for 8-10 years. Again, the coach who brought me in here, I kind of took over with that. So that was much more of a continuation versus some of these other paths I've had to adjust and kind of make on my own. And the simplest way I can explain it, though, is it all comes back to is like doing what's right for that kid and that team and that program. And again, all three of my teams are in very different situations, but it's still the same coach. I just operate through those systems differently.
Totally. I know we're sort of diving on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's something that's interesting. I'm sure, people are interested to hear it as well, but, it's, I guess it's really important, how you stress about the culture of the team, right? And that's something that, you can see isn't built overnight. And I know, people always talk about the process and, employing things like that to where it's all long-term and, not, I guess, having that delayed gratification, all that great stuff. But that stems from little changes or, little moments every single day where, you actually commit to what you're saying and, having the ability to, go and talk to a team knowing that you have the backing of coaching staff around you, or even just the commitment from the team to actually respond to what you're saying. That doesn't happen, just like that, right? That comes from, a greater culture that's built in over years and years. And that takes everyone involved. It's something that I actually heard on a podcast a little while ago was a fella who was over at the Philly Eagles when they won the Super Bowl. And he sort of stressed how important it was to have cohesion between departments. And that's what breeds success, is you can't have a missing link basically anywhere if you want to be successful. It needs to be a tide that lifts all boats is communication, right? So
exactly.
Even just seeing it in the day-to-day operations, on the gym floor or in, the admin room and stuff like that, you start to understand that, it's not just about going in and putting an athlete under a barbell and telling them to squat or something like that. There's so much more that goes into it that a lot of people may miss unless they, really look deeper behind the scenes. So it's
100%.
Super interesting. Back on track, let's talk about strength and power.
Yep.
So traditionally, as I'm sure what a lot of people know, coaches may cycle their athletes through different blocks of training throughout the year. It's something that we've touched on previously in the podcast where, super basic overview, there may be some process where during the off season, we may set a hypertrophy kind of base where we try and build a little bit of muscle. That's a good time to do that. We're in a stress-free environment. We don't have the worries of the season, all that kind of thing. We might then move into something a bit more, strength orientated in the following block. And then finally, as we get a bit more sport specific, heading into sort of late preseason, we might want to introduce some power and stuff like that. For yourself, managing 3 different teams, you could have different teams, you will have different teams in different stages of their year at one time. As you said, you've got your fall group, the guys playing lacrosse are more sort of spring or even later. For yourself, is that sort of a thought process that you implement progressing block to block, or are you sort of in the camp where you'd like to have a little bit of everything all at once? You kind of, bit of power during the hypertrophy block and so on, or is there still kind of a main focus?
Yeah, so I love questions like this because they're simple and complex answers at the same time. I think my favorite thing about strength and conditioning is the answer is always it depends, right? So just everything I say after that, I'm going to preface with it all depends. But I think a big key to look at in how I look at my training blocks are, I do look at the general, the typical, approach to periodization of my off season, starting with general prep, hypertrophy, strength, power, and just kind of moving through those spectrums, because the simplest way I can explain it when talking to people is you can kind of look at that as like your car, right? So the hypertrophy is the number of cylinders in your car. You got a V4, V6, V8. Well, if you're a power sport, you want to add up to that V8. If you don't, well, you can do all the fancy stuff that you want to make the car look flashy and fast. You can put a spoiler on it and all that, but if it's only got a V4, it's not going to beat the V8. So you go to that V8, you add that muscle. That's you start your off-season block, and then you do some of the other things. You get the right tires, you build all that stuff up. That's building in your strength, and then really that power is that fine tuning of, okay, what kind of race car am I doing now? Am I racing a truck? Am I racing an F1? Am I racing a NASCAR? And putting the appropriate power into it that way, and those little fine tuning details. That's really what I look at strength and conditioning as, and how I approach my off season. Now, all that being said, just like a car, you can inherit something totally different. If you inherit a Prius and you're trying to train a power athlete, you're going to have some work cut out for you, and no matter what you do to that Prius, it might not be able to be a Ferrari.
Still just be a Prius.
Exactly. So, that there's that element to it, but also, what if you inherit the right build? So we'll take a power sport. I do get a Ferrari. It's already got a V8. It's got a ton of muscle. Well, then maybe I don't need to focus on muscle for that athlete. If I'm at that prerequisite level, let's look and see where they're at. So that's where that it depends comes in. Another element, something that I always talk to our interns about that I think gets missed a lot in college athletics, and this would probably apply to like the club levels of the developmental clubs for all the different international sports. How does your athlete respond to weight room training stimulus? Because if they've never done it, they're going to respond to something. They could do it the same every day. There's so much information out there about what early adaptations are and how it's much more neurological, and you're driving movement patterns and all that. And then you start getting out of that into the actual muscular development. And from there, you're really talking about that fine tuning, like I did before, of motor unit recruitment and power. So depending on how the athlete responds, whether it's a daily change, a weekly change, a monthly change, that's also going to be how, something else that's going to affect what type of training block I give them, what type of training program I give them, all that. And, then I can go lastly too, something that I don't think a lot of strength coaches like to actually think about is, did what I do worked? Did I get what I tried to achieve, or did it fail for some reason? Was there interference from the head coach? Did we run them when we were trying to gain weight? Did we, only get 2 days of training in the weight room when I was supposed to make them stronger? I can tell you right now, I will get a lot stronger if I train 4 days versus 2 days. So, or did I just write a bad program? I've done that before. I've definitely written a bad program before that was supposed to get a certain stimulus that it didn't. And so I can have the best periodized training plan in the world, but if all of those blocks tie off of the first block getting done the right way, if that doesn't get done the right way, like the next 7 blocks I have are messed up. So I have my general outline of what I try to do, but there's certain markers that need to happen, and what you can't do is sacrifice your first 2 checkpoints and say, oh, well, I didn't hit those 2 checkpoints, I'm going to go get these other 6 anyway. What really, realistically, is what's going to have to happen is you need to achieve those first 2 checkpoints and sacrifice the back 2 on the end. Coaches may not like that. Strength and conditioning coaches might not like saying that I'm going to sacrifice speed and power and functional fitness and functional strength and sport-specific movement and whatever other buzzword you want to throw out there. But if your whole plan was predicated off of getting that muscle hypertrophy and you don't, well,
what do you have to play with?
Exactly. You have nothing to play with, and then is it even worth it at the end? I can be functionally moving very well, but I'll take my lacrosse team, for example. I can almost guarantee every year the kid who's 5'9" to 6 foot, that's under 190 pounds, they get hurt every year. They're not big enough and strong enough to withstand the physical forces of a competitive lacrosse season, especially with the way we play. So, that's my again, my it depends approach, but I think I encompassed a lot of the things and variables that I look at in training.
Totally. It's something I think back home that a lot of people sometimes have a hard time grasping, is like how important, I guess, that hypertrophy is for a lot of these college athletes. Mainly, I think, because with a lot of our big sports back home, you're drafted basically straight out of high school. So for Australian rules, for example, like you'll get like pretty much every draftee goes in, they're 18 years old. They could be 6'3", 80 kilos soaking wet, and all of a sudden they're supposed to be playing against grown men,
right?
And people wonder why, in that system, maybe one or two times you'll get a freak that can just go in and they can just play straight away and they're ready to go. But more often than not, it takes these kids 2, 3, almost nearly sometimes 5 years to build the required base to actually withstand the challenges, the pressures at that higher level, the impacts, everything like that.
100%. And that's what, like, again, I look at my role as like, is 2 to 5 years the ideal amount of time to be training that, or can we focus our training block and be efficient and get that done in 1 year? I'm finding a lot of success, especially with my sports that run a lot. It shouldn't take more than a year. It shouldn't. But if you don't do it correctly, you'll see it take 2 to 5 years where they're just still behind, and they just seem behind. And I'll ask you a couple questions, and I think it just kind of highlights it. What are the main things, like someone who's really, really trained, like what are you expecting them to develop? Are you expecting them to get a lot more power? Or are you expecting them to get better movement patterns and fine-tuning their movement, right? Well, I think where people miss things is a lot of people will do that with really advanced athletes, and then they'll do it with high school athletes, and that will work for high school athletes because, again, if they haven't been exposed and trained, their main focus is movement patterns. So they will get better by that initial training. They'll see improvements and then think that that's all that they need to do, when in reality it's, no, what worked for the advanced person that was a movement pattern training worked for you too because you needed movement pattern training. Now the difference between you and that advanced person is 30 to 40 pounds of muscle, and you better get that on you quick or it's not going to be a fun time.
100%. Absolutely. So let's talk about where we are with football at the moment, because again, for those that don't know, the squad size that we're working with this year is like over 100 people. So not only is that a lot of moving parts during lift and things like that, we have to break that into multiple different lifts each day, or even throughout the week to try and get everyone through. It also means that you're going to have a lot of guys at different stages of their gym experience, their career out on the field, and that as well. You got the freshmen coming in, like we spoke about, that probably need to start to build that muscle and everything like that, right through to your seniors who can pretty much just about jump straight onto a power program and they're good to go, right? So how does that sort of look week to week then? So obviously, do you just have one sort of main thing that you get everyone to follow and then sort of go from there? Or is there like almost like a different programs that you sort of look to line up, for each athlete?
Yeah, so I'm pretty fortunate with the number of hands that I have here, and the commitment of the whole strength and conditioning staff here at Yale to, make sure we're putting out the right quality training that we need. And just for, again, the team of football, that's 120 plus guys that are all over the map like that. We have a lot of different options. So we run flexible nonlinear training, and we wait until the day that the athletes come in for their training program to pick their workout for them. And we take a lot of factors into account for it. We get their physical feeling of exhaustion, we get their mental feeling of exhaustion, and we also will then look at the actual physical ability on that day by doing power output jumps on the force plates. And we take all that feedback and really look at that physical feedback from the force plates to be able to say, like, okay, I'm pretty confident at saying physically this is where this athlete is right now. And then me knowing them as their coach, I know all the other stuff that you talked about. Who's developing, who played Saturday, who, needs to be ready to go if, like maybe they're the fourth or fifth guy in line in a position that usually ends up getting 4 or 5 deep in season. So we take all that information into account, and on any given day, depending on where they're at, we give them the appropriate training program, the right dose of training that they need that day. So if their power output isn't great, I'm not going to train power. If they're not recovered, they may need a recovery workout. So that's really the approach that we have. Now, obviously, we want to dose in training the right way, so we hope to get some kind of strength, some kind of power at least once every week. And generally, if we do it the right way with those recovery programs, talk to the coach, manage practice volume the right way, we're able to achieve that and have them ready to go, in season. And on the flip side, we also see it with those kids that need to develop. We see it at the end of the season. We have those kids in reserve gaining muscle, gaining strength, becoming more powerful and producing more force, and getting themselves ready to have a really good off season so that hopefully next year they're not in that developmental boat again.
Great. So yeah, we've covered, I guess, that sort of progression through as we go, throughout the season or even, throughout the year for some athletes. Let's look at like where we are right now, I guess, in season and more around the actual power development. So as we know, strength can take time. You need a really good block of strength training that's super specific, that's hitting, a certain level of intensity to kind of build that over time. I think people are quite familiar with that. What some people, might be more interested in, what a lot of people often get wrong, is actually how to develop someone's power. It can be sometimes a little bit more finicky, a bit more tentative, some very basic concepts that you can kind of cover. But yeah, let's dive into that. So from what I've seen on the floor, there's been a lot of different ways that we've looked at, improving an athlete's power output in the football team. So we've had obviously your basic barbell stuff. So some sort of, version of a clean or, a jerk or, some sort of press or something like that, where we're just moving, relatively heavy weight fast. That's basic. A lot of people do that. Great. Let's look beyond that. We can touch on it as well, of course, but I think what people would be almost more interested in is things like your plyometrics, or even if there's some devices that you might use to kind of, try and improve that power and exactly how we're sort of programming for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the plyometrics, one thing in particular that I think, I'll kind of actually rephrase this, not even just plyometrics, power in general, right? This is the part of our training where we do really start focusing on being a bit more sport specific. As you mentioned, like, we still do the general, non-specific power training using barbells. Yeah. But power, aside from being a measurable thing, right, of, force times distance divided by time, the really what we're talking about a lot of times when we talk about power with our coaches is that translation of our strength and power to the movements that we see out on the field. And that's, again, it's a perfect opportunity to be sport specific. So I give a lot of credit to two coaches on my staff, Abby Quinn and Alex Mawat-Larson. They really helped spearhead looking at how we do some of our power training as specifics to plyometrics really differently last year. So Abby had the idea of working with volleyball. Well, their whole sport is plyometric. I shouldn't be just looking at their power output. I should also look at what happens when they're landing and trying to improve how they do their landings as well to make them last better throughout the season, as well as be more powerful. Because if you can have a better landing naturally, you can, use your reactive strength and all that stuff better. Again, it's no secret. A lot of people know volleyball players have really good reactive strength index usually. So improving how they land and utilizing that is a great tool. So we look at our plyometric program from that sense of, what do they do out on the field? So like linemen don't have a lot of plyometric stuff that they're doing. They need some basic plyometrics, some basic landing and all that. So they'll do it, but they don't need it to the same degree as our wide receivers, our running backs, our DBs, our tight ends, all those guys. So we approach that training in that power development through a plyo program where we actually took a look at your takeoff and your landing, and this actually sparked the conversation that ended up helping us to kind of get you guys connected to come here, where we really took an interest in some of these other metrics on the force plate and other ways to evaluate all this, from the fact that we were picking plyo progressions off certain landing variables that we saw in their training with plyometrics, particularly in volleyball, and constructed our whole off-season training and implementation of plyometrics for football with that kind of thought process in mind. And so that's some of the like starter levels. And then really when you go into like how we then develop it, it's all progression. We do your basic plyometrics that you would see out on the field that help help improve your running mechanics. And then we take the weight room training that we do in here and we combine all that to use some, speed devices where now it's, okay, we've done the mechanics, we've done the force training, now we need to combine them. So we use these devices to actually run and train against resistance that is appropriate for us while we're looking at those mechanics. So aside from getting the feedback from the device, we'll also record the actual run, sit there, look at it, and go through it with the kid and say, hey, you can see your shoulders elevate and rise here. You need to sit in your hips and actually gain the ground going this way. So, that's one example of our power training with plyos and speed devices. Another is, in lacrosse, a lot of the shot power comes from rotation, right? So that rotation comes from the upper body, but it also starts down at the feet. And something that we're really noticing in a lot of our rotational power right now is we don't do a great job utilizing the feet. We over rely on our torso. So there's a big emphasis in our training right now aimed towards improving that and actually using our foot just like you would in a golf swing, throwing a punch, all that stuff, because again, it's no different there. It's the same concept of foot through ground to arm, and you really look at what you could look at what elite level track throwers do, and it's probably the same kind of concept.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. It's certainly something that we've even played around with back home is the idea around how sport specific should you go, in the gym, because at the end of the day, as part of these guys' schedule, they're out, they're playing their sport as well. So there needs to be, it's sort of a bit of a curve, right? And you sort of need to find yourself at different stages of the week on different parts of the curve. You need to still complete things that are super non-sport specific, mostly being things like, barbell training, a squat or a bench press or basic sort of fundamental movement patterns, but then sort of move towards, as we said, that sort of more, like with the power, more sport-specific focus that can then set them up, to try and train at their best. So it's certainly, a mixture of all things. And I think the art of coaching, as you said, is, finding the things that work, and that can even change, over time. It's looking at, okay, we implemented, this into our training. Hey, this improved, but oh look, we're noticing, okay, guys aren't, using their legs well enough for rotational power. Okay, how can we fix that? So it's constantly evolving and it's constantly having to adapt as a coach, which means obviously your programming is constantly being updated and constantly improving. But yeah, still sticking to those, I guess, fundamental basics always to begin with.
Absolutely, yeah.
One last thing that I wanted to touch on with you, TJ, we know obviously, especially with things like power, there's quite a large stimulus that sort of, I guess, comes from that, and quite oftentimes a lot of fatigue can be accumulated as well. To wrap things up, I just wanted to touch on how you manage that fatigue in the athlete. You spoke about a couple of things previously already, but I guess, when we're looking at trying to develop power, the last thing we want is an athlete that's completely toasted, because, they're not going to be able to, use their CNS effectively. They're not going to be able to move their body fast enough to actually benefit from any sort of power training. So what are the things that you do with your teams to kind of monitor that fatigue to make sure that, when it is time to actually develop that power, they're A-OK, ready to go?
The two biggest things would definitely be, like, we use the force plates as an assessment of fatigue, and we look at a lot of different variables. There's up to like 10 to 12 that you could look at. We try to kind of gauge ours off of a few less than that. The actual power output and jump height being a really important indicator, just because they kind of encompass a lot of the other 10 variables. So we use that information to get a quick snapshot of where that person might be in the moment right there. And then the other would honestly just be like their overall practice load too, because something that's kind of been an intriguing thought of ours lately is how we can really assess whether or not someone's able to handle the load of what they're going to be doing as a competitive athlete. There's so much information on return to play from injuries for, a specific in the moment test that never really encapsulates, what a full week of playing and practice and training and all that will look like. So we do use a lot of the, player load information from their catapult information to really assess that as well too. So if someone's just coming back, maybe the first practice, we're like, hey, we're going to limit it at 50% of the load that they would experience in a normal practice, and then to build them up, we'll expose them to a different load another way, whether it's through the weight room, through other conditioning or something like that. Just so, again, you're getting the tissue adapted to that again. You're letting the body experience something to have to train and adapt to, but not overdoing it to the point that you break down. So, again, it's a very case-by-case basis when you get to that point, but it is a lot of that stuff to think about. And again, it is why your training in your off season is so important, and it needs to prepare you for what you're going to do, not just in a game, but in a full week of training, to be able to, be available for the game, because you don't want to go from nothing to something. You might be able to handle it for a day or two, and then, after a week, your body just gives out. It can't keep up with the physical demands you've been putting it through because it hasn't been exposed to it.
Yeah, for sure. It's what we preach all the time at RAD as well, is that nice sort of steady progression, back to, return to training. And then there's another step that, again, is so important is returning not just to training, but actually returning to playing.
Yeah.
It's that gentle progression where, we sort of see what we can handle. We keep trying to just push the envelope a little bit each time. And eventually, we adapt enough to where we can actually, go out and play our sport. So
absolutely.
TJ, I reckon we'll wrap it up there. I'll open the floor up to you if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on or any closing statements. I'll let you think about that. As you're thinking, I'll say it's been a really awesome experience coming over to see how you guys operate. I'm really grateful, obviously, for the opportunity that I can go back home and share that experience with the team. It's quite cool to see, sharing ideas and understandings and things like that is certainly something that I think the industry as a whole could benefit from. A lot more as people kind of broadening the horizons a little bit and that kind of thing. So, it's been an awesome opportunity, been a pleasure, mate. But anything else from your great self?
No, probably the only other thing I'd say is just it's been awesome for us to have you guys here to really keep seeing. Like, my general belief is that, this field is so new, so young. Again, in America, the founder of our association, that is like the standard of certification that you need, Boyd Epley, he's still alive. And coming from the medical field, where the person who kind of started nursing, Florence Nightingale, is a well-known name, and the thing that she was known for was, hey, we're going to wash our hands. Like, that still stands true today. There's nobody who doubts the, importance of being able to wash your hands. Well, Boyd, for college athletics and college training, his thing was, muscle is important, and I think some people forget that stuff and overcomplicate it, and there's still so much room to grow. There's so many awesome things. Like, every time I talk with you, I feel like I'm learning something new from hearing about the force plate metrics and just all the stuff that you guys have talked to and looked into. But what I can appreciate is that you hear what we say about some of the old school stuff and, what really was the solid foundation of strength and conditioning, and you don't discard it. And it's really when you blend those two together perfectly is when the field of strength and conditioning is going to really take off. We're going to see performance from athletes that is just out of this world if we can get people to be more invested in actually doing that. And we're also going to do right by the kids, because if you don't use the technology and information that's there, but also have that understanding of that foundation, I don't think we're doing right by them. And, there's so much potential that's left untapped. So that's probably the last thing I'd leave it as is know our history, but also make sure we know what is coming out there, and don't discard information that could be very useful just because it's new. I think we tend to struggle with that a lot in our field.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really great place to leave it. So, TJ, thanks very much for your time, mate. It's much appreciated.
Appreciate you having me on and letting me produce with you.
Yeah, we'll say actually it's a bit of a makeshift setup. So he's part of the production team now as well. So we'll have to send a check in the mail once we get home. But yeah, thanks again, TJ, for your time. And thanks to you guys out there for tuning in wherever you are. And we'll see you back in the lab for our next episode very soon.